Um, Hi, I'm so glad to welcome all of you today. Today we are talking about bringing children into the natural environment. And I have four teachers, all early childhood teachers, who are going to be sharing with me, conversation with me today. Bill Fulbrecht, Merril, Merceli, Amy Binin, and John Allgood. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about each of them, okay? Whoops, for some reason John, I don't have yours here. John, I'm gonna let you talk about yourself because somehow it disappeared from what I have here. So Amy Binin has taught in the New York City public school system for 32 years and just retired in August. She now hopes to continue working part-time with children. Amy has taught at the New York City Lower Lab School, the Special Music School of America, and at the Brooklyn New School. Across the span of her career, Amy has taught pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, first grade, reading intervention, and early childhood creative arts, where children explored music, movement, and fine art. Amy has also worked with early childhood teachers as a staff developer and coach. In 1996, Amy visited the schools of Reggio Emilia, Italy, where I met her actually, where she attended a week of seminars led by the educators of the various schools. The experience inspired Amy to become a keen observer of children at play and to develop curriculum and inquiries based on the children's interests. At the Brooklyn New School, Amy, Bill Fulbrecht, and a group of other early childhood teachers decided that their children needed to be actively connected to nature on a regular basis. This was the seed that grew into the Brooklyn New School's Forest School program. Merril Merceli is an early childhood educator who has been teaching around the world for the last 15 years. She and her family have recently relocated to Amherst, Massachusetts after living in Beijing, China. Since returning, Merril has been supporting curriculum development at Learn at Moores Hill, an outdoor elementary program. This March, she will be opening her own outdoor early childhood program, Forest Folk, in Amherst. Merril is an advocate for play, inquiry-based learning, and learning outside. Here's John. John Allgood has taught kindergarten for more than 20 years. He is the founding kindergarten teacher at Arts and Letters, a public school in Brooklyn, New York. At Arts and Letters, he and Valerie Lockhart pioneered Outside Classroom, a program to bring some of the elements of forest schools to an urban public school. Willliam Fulbrecht, who I call Bill, is a retired kindergarten teacher with over 25 years experience in the New York City public schools. He is currently coordinator of Forest and Shore School early childhood outdoor programs at the Brooklyn New School PS 146, Forest and Shore School, and is an education advisor for the PBS children's television series Cyber Chase. He is also on the board of directors of the Brooklyn Kindergarten Society, who provide early childhood education to children in underserved Brooklyn neighborhoods. So it's a pretty wonderful group we have. Teachers who are really, I could truly say, are after, like, they speak to my heart, all right? I want to start with a quote by Emma Morris. I'm going to put a link at the end of this conversation on the blog to Emma Morris's TED Talk. But I thought this was such a beautiful quote. She said, "Let children touch nature, because that which is untouched is unloved." And I thought that spoke so much to this time also. You know, I mean, one of the things about this time is that people are missing being touched, you know, and the idea of not being able to touch your friends, not being able to touch your family members who aren't living with you is so difficult. But you can touch nature, and that is so important. So I'd like to get started with everybody. And Bill mentioned something when I was asking for some ideas, and he was saying that one thing that stood out to him is in terms of working with children out in the natural environment, is that it really supports the child's development of self-regulation. And what that really means as opposed to compliance with school structures. It's a whole different thing when they're outside. So maybe you guys can get started on that, because that seems like a really important, that whole idea of self-regulation seems like an important issue.
I think when I started as a kindergarten teacher, I was, I was already, it was my second career, so I was already an adult. And one of the things that kept coming up, the phrase that kept coming up all the time was, "Are the children school ready?" And I've thought a lot about what that means, and I've thought a lot about it over the years about what it means to be school ready. Are we talking about being successful only within school, or are we talking about being successful in life? And are we life ready? Is that really what we want kids to be? The longer that I taught, the more narrow that definition of school ready became. And you could kind of see it coming down, ahead with the No Child Left Behind, and how school ready really began to mean, are you ready to read? In a nutshell, it was, are you ready to read? When I first started teaching kindergarten, it was literally that. Do you have the necessary skills to begin reading instruction, which would start in first grade? By the time I left and by the time I retired, that had been pushed all the way down to pre-K, really. And that many of the other skills that children learn in kindergarten have been set aside in favor of a more rigorous approach to literacy. And I always felt that that was a shame, because there was so much being missed. And that if we really mean by school ready, if we really want kids to be life ready, then we have to think about what are the skills necessary for a child to succeed in life. And the term self-regulation kept coming up also. And it brought to mind a kind of famous psychological experiment that probably everybody has seen or heard about. I think it's sometimes called the cookie experiment, where children are offered a cookie, but if they'll wait 5 minutes, they can have a second cookie if they don't eat the first cookie. And they film children waiting. And the children who would wait for 5 minutes were prized for their self-regulation. But really, what they're doing is just complying with this test. They're going to wait until they get this cookie, and there's this outside motivation for waiting, right? But I don't think that's really what we mean by self-regulation. I think that self-regulation is more the types of skills that allow an individual to flourish in some field. So if you're really, let's say you're a musician, you're willing to put off some to delay your gratification while you practice. Practice is sometimes arduous, it's sometimes boring, it sometimes is unsatisfying, but you have the motivation and the will to push through that because you believe you'll reach another level. That kind of attitude is really necessary in almost any profession that you would engage in. And I think it's important for people to have that feeling in order to be happy in life. When you think about school, most of what we're asking children to do is to comply. It's to comply with our demands in the classroom as teachers. One of the first things we noticed when we went outside with children was that some of those demands were relieved. We didn't feel we had to direct anything, really. We just brought them to the place. We would talk about what we might find there, encourage exploration, and then our job was to stand back, watch, see what happened, and follow those interests. And this notion of self-regulation, I think we realized that what children were developing was a sense of self-reliance. They were their self-confidence. They were practicing skills. They were working at things that were of their own interest. And you could see you could see what their interests were right away. Some kids would spend the whole time looking for insects. Other kids would spend the whole time creating, elaborate pretend scenarios with their friends. But everybody was engaged, and everybody was engaged for the entire time. So I think that is what we really want for children to be self-reliant, and for them to be to be regulating their own interests, I think is what I'm trying to say. And that's a skill that you need to develop. And I think being outdoors offers many opportunities for children to do that. And I'll stop talking now because I talked for a long time.
Do you all find that when you're outdoors with children? What Bill is saying, does that speak to your experience?
I know that there's been kids who flourish out in the forest where they're really struggling inside the classroom, and I'm talking about regulation, more of like a body regulation, where they might come in and they'll just they don't know what to do with their body in their space. There's not, they'll be knocking over furniture and knocking into another child, and it turns into, they can't regulate themselves. They're frustrated. The kids in the classroom are frustrated with him because he's or I'm thinking of one particular kid, might hurt them. But I'm thinking of this child again, bring him out in the forest. He had such an extensive space that he was able to explore in his own way. And it was a completely new experience for him. He was able to get the sensory input that he needed. He got to socialize because he was new to socializing, and he also didn't speak English. He was from Yemen, and just was so exuberant and thrilled. And the kids who in the forest, the kids who might have been frightened of him started coming to him because he had so much positive energy. So it was a wonderful experience. I'm also thinking about what Bill was saying is it's really important when kids are in the classroom or in the forest for teachers to be stepping back and listening. And I was thinking about forest school. I remember Pat saying to Bill just last year, gee, I'm so experienced, and each year I just seem to pull back more and more back, and just keeping myself quiet and just videotaping or photographing or writing down and just finding out about the children. And it's wonderful. Right, I agree. They could self-regulate and self-direct, and they can persevere if we respect what their interests are. So when we're going out to forest school, we're not saying, okay, everybody needs to, I don't know, find the oak tree that has this leaf, the kids are free to do whatever they want. And from that, we've learned from the children.
Can I ask you, is there any time when they're out there? Now, you did that one day a week, right, with your forest school. Was there any time during that day when they were out there when everybody did do something together, or was it the entire time?
We have a ritual at forest school. Bill, you know what I'm thinking about, right?
Yeah.
Coming together, and we come together in our singing circle. The kids named it the singing circle, and we start singing together. We also I'm trying to think, Bill, because we've changed it so many times over different years, but sometimes we might remind them of remember we were looking at photos in the classroom of some of the fairy houses that some kids made last week, and we showed photos. You might want to do that this week, an invitation, and it might be interesting, but but coming together as a group, I love how we've come together around a song or around our special tree, right, Bill? Bill
Yeah.
usually leads at the time, which can sometimes be really beautiful. It would be really great, Bill, if you talk a little bit about what we've done with the tree. And then we
Yeah.
always end with a singing circle.
I think ritual is really important. It's just, as it is in the classroom, you have your rituals that bring kids together. And so we would always start with a song circle. And there was a place in the park that was kind of set up for that. And then later we began joining hands and making a circle around this beautiful beech tree that is in the park. And we would just spend a few moments quietly observing the tree, looking at the tree, and then kids would say what they noticed about the tree. I remember one day when it was raining on us. It was raining pretty hard. And one child looked at the tree and said, "There's a river flowing down that tree." And it did look like that. It was, if you stood and watched for a while, you could see how it traveled all the way down the branches and then ended up on the trunk. And it was just gorgeous. So that became something that we did either at the beginning of our trip or at the end. But there was always something at the beginning, and we always tried to have some sort of meeting at the end where children had a chance to talk about what they had done and share with each other. So yeah, but being together as a community was a big part of it.
John, when you did your forest school, it really was like in a park near your school, right?
Yes. So our idea that the values we wanted to kind of represent or kind of embed in the program was that we wanted kids to be in nature. We decided for ourselves we wanted to prioritize being able to get there on our own. So we wanted somewhere we could walk in. We were lucky enough to be close enough to Fort Greene Park that we could do that. I mean, there's some schools don't have that ability to get to, and Fort Greene Park is not the it's not the most natural place in the world either. Prospect Park is a lot richer in terms of the kind of natural world that you can explore. But just want to follow up and kind of re-emphasize again what Bill and Amy are saying about this, the routines of our experience, provided this predictability and comfort and security for kids. So we would walk there. We would have our circle that we would gather around for snack, and we would sing songs, and kids would come, and there was hardly ever have we ever had to go, chase kids down to come back to the circle. To me, that says a lot right there. In my classroom, I expect kids to listen when I, give directions, but it is a different element than saying, "Hey, let's come gather around now and see what we explored today." And the kids' investment in that was great. But I think the predictability of routines is what all teachers try to get in their classroom, established. But the reason you do that is so then the variables can be engaged with. That's where the cognitive dissonance is, and that's where the learning is. The learning is not from following a set of directions. I expect my children to follow my directions when I give instructions. But that's not where the learning is, and that's not independence. Often that's noted as being independent, and what that is that's following instructions, which is not independence. It's important, but it's not independence. It's almost the opposite. It's being dependent. Independence is engaging in a variety of factors and assimilating information, and then charting a course that assimilates those, and you make your decisions, and there's many decisions that can be made from that. And I think that the beauty of doing something in nature is that nature provides a high level of predictability and a high level of variance. And so I think that so the way children engage in it, they are regulating how much of the predictability, how much of the variance they're engaging in. And so the cognitive growth from this sort of environment and for learning is great. And there's time to do a directed lesson in school, but we have to know what we're doing when we're doing that. We're taking out the variance, we're taking out the cognitive dissonance in a lot of ways, you know, when I've spent many hours shooting baskets from the free throw line. You know, there's not a lot of cognitive dissonance or variability happening that, but it's a skill I'm practicing. And that's what some of the work we do in school is. This work, however, develops a deeper and, you know, sort of, it develops, helps kid develop on autonomy. And that's really what we want ultimately for kids to be doing when they enter life. I mean, this is their life. I don't mean to, but we want them to be developing autonomy along the way toward when they become fully autonomous human beings.
Mm-hmm. Could you say some more about that, about the idea of children developing autonomy?
Yes, autonomy is you're making decisions based on information that you have, goals that you want, and you bring it all together and making a decision that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And you know, I think of a Deborah Meyer quote, and I don't remember exactly, but it's something along the lines of, when you have people who have gone through their entire schooling and have never even been around other people who are making their own decisions, and that this is like the educational structure, then how can you expect them to be, you know, rational participants in a democratic society?
Right.
And so I think in our classrooms, we have a chance to have honest discussions where I was thinking this afternoon about the inevitable conversation when kids are digging in the dirt and come up with an earthworm or a grub or whatever, and somebody is excited about smashing it or smushing it. And I think about the impassioned conversations that have resulted from that, where kids are defending what they think about that, mm-hmm. with passion, with clarity, and with commitment, you know. And it's not for me to make the final ruling on that, as others have said. You know, I'm not. Sometimes I'm the arbiter, but sometimes I'm not. You know.
That's such a beautiful example of kids having autonomy and ownership, and letting them naturally work through their conflicts. And I bet they were really impassioned too, right? I was thinking about forest school. You know, when, as teachers, we want our children to come together and not only have a voice for their own feelings and thoughts, but come together as a community. And I remember when we started thinking about forest school, what was it going to look like? We all decided that we wanted the forest to be our classroom, and we wanted to have the kids feel at that sense of ownership, and that predictability that you guys were talking about gives that to them each week. And just like your classroom gives them that comfort and predictability. I think the beauty of the forest, and if you're visiting the same place and they're really getting to know it, is they start noticing the most minute changes, and it's just beautiful, you know. Mm-hmm. Not only just seasonal change, but yeah, they notice so many different things. It's really beautiful.
Merril, so for you, do you have a ritual that you follow with your children? What is it like when you do your school?
I agree. Rituals are so important, and I view them sort of like we would with an infant and toddler, where they come back to the parent or caretaker, and we sort of fill their cup and fill their heart with the ritual, and then they go back out to explore and are sort of filled with confidence in exploring their world. And something recently that I've started doing at our neighborhood forest preschool, forest kindergarten, where we meet 2 times a week and parents or caregivers are with their child, is I've started using a Kelly kettle. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this. So we can't create a fire in the woods here. We're in public space. But what a Kelly kettle is, essentially is a small self-contained fire, and then a large kettle where the water is in the walls of the kettle. So it's very fast boiling, but the children get to be a part of this fire making ritual, which is just part of us. It's this sort of just primitive part of, like, I don't know any person or any child who doesn't like just sort of staring at a fire. And in 5 minutes, you have a cup of tea. And right now in the time of COVID, as long as everybody brings their own mug, and I always have a few extra tea bags or hot cocoa, then we all can share a hot cup, a warm drink, and a story together. And I feel like these, you don't need so many. You need, the songs and a circle and a story. And if you can make a little sweet fire in a kettle, that's like the icing on the cake. But those little touch points are so powerful for creating community. And I feel like just energize children, give them all the confidence in the world to go out and explore. And I've been, as listening to everybody speak about self-regulation, I've thought about a couple of things. One is that self-regulation, it feels good. It feels good for children to be embodied and know their capabilities and their capacity. And that's what play, and Renee, I know you write so much about play. That's what play does for children. Unstructured, free, self-directed play. And that's what nature provides. And it's different to the play that you watch on a playground is so different than the play that you see in a natural environment, whatever it might be. And the really the highest form of play we can ask for is sociodramatic play. And that's really, maybe not every time, but you see it a lot, inspired by being in whatever natural environment you're in, whether it's a park or the woods or just a little clearing, a meadow or grassland, and finding a few sticks and stones. And hearing everybody speak about self-regulation, I've been tying it a lot to the power of being outdoors and in forest school or nature. And we're giving them what, unfortunately, a lot of children are not getting in early childhood classrooms or kindergarten classrooms with highly structured time. And it doesn't feel good for a lot of kids. And it's because they don't get to feel their body and feel their capabilities. And they can't do that unless they have that time and space for play.
Right. John, something you said really stuck with me when you talked about the worm and the way the children defended the worm, actually, is something else that's happening, which is really a respect for living things. That's I think that's a pretty big deal, right, for children to understand that, to have a compassion for living things and a respect for living things. The life of the forest. I heard something the other day, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but that how can we expect children to defend saving the environment if they haven't had experience with learning to love the environment? I'm saying it wrong. It's not the way it was said, but I think I have the idea of it. The experience of loving the environment first, of learning to love the environment on their own, to have a personal relationship with the environment. I think, what about children who live in the city, though? What about children who don't? Your classes, some of you, not you, Merril, but the other classes are in the city, but it's a teacher taking them either to a park or to the shore, in your case, Will, or to this other park, John. Merril, you're in a more rural area. And so you have forests around you. But, what about, Merril, if you remember where you taught when you were in teaching in Queens, for example, or you said in Beijing, right? Where it wasn't, a forest or a park where kids could kind of run free. What do you do?
Can I just, because I did think about this today, Renee, and I thought about, my time at PS 244 and our beautiful playground, but it was really just blacktop and a small patch of dirt. And two things stuck out to me. One was puddles and all of the inquiry possible. and wonder and joy possible through puddles and simply being a grown-up in children's life who says, sure, jump in the puddle. You make the choice. And two, the second thing that I thought about was a time that I think of several pigeons somehow ended up dead in the playground. And it was really impactful. And the children were so moved. And we created a whole ceremony, a eulogy. The children wrote a eulogy for that pigeon. And even within the city, it's still teeming with life. And so just thinking briefly today, because I knew I was speaking with a group of New York City educators, I was trying to remember. And those were the two things that just like popped in my head as really powerful moments for me. And I know they were powerful moments for the children as well, and turned into inquiries. They both led to really project-based inquiries that were sustained.
Right.
During this time, we are not able to go to Prospect Park, and we're not able to go to the Marine Park Salt Marsh. But we are able to take small groups of kids out into the neighborhood, and we've discovered several community gardens that have allowed us, have given us access. They've given us keys to go in. And at first I was wondering, how is this going to be? Because I'm so used to going to the park, and the space is so ideal for their exploration. And I found that they are just as engaged in these little community gardens as they are at Prospect Park. It's pretty amazing, and it's a lot of fun because we have to walk through our neighborhood. If we go to one park, we cross over the BQE, which is this enormous highway with all these cars going. Actually, to get to all the parks, we have to cross the BQE, and we go through some neighborhoods that are pretty industrial, and there's just a lot of untended little plots and tree wells and things that nobody is really caring for. And in those tree wells, there's an enormous amount of stuff happening. We passed by one lot that seemed to have a lot of junk in it, and we stood at the fence for a while. And we realized there was a family of cats, of feral cats that was living in that lot. And we watched them for quite a while and trying to figure out what they were doing, where they were going. So I'm encouraged by all of the things that they are finding. We went to one little garden, and we found a dead crow was there in the garden that had been buried under a bunch of leaves. And that, when, like you were saying, Merril, when kids confront a death like that, it's a huge thing. Everyone was very curious about this, and we talked, for a long time about what to do. Should we leave it there? Should we bury it? And they finally decided they would just cover it back over and leave it where it was. But I'm really curious to see how this year develops, because we're spending these smaller amounts of time, but at least we're getting out and seeing some things.
I remember we did walks all the time around the school neighborhood, and it was interesting. There's been times where we said, okay, we're looking for tree treasures. So kids are looking for whatever that might be, and we're not defining it. But then there's other times that you just walk around and the kids notice things that you forget, you don't appreciate as an adult. They're able to enjoy the sweetest things, They could see, oh, look, there's some plants growing here, or whatever it is. But they could, really appreciate even the smallest things.
One thing I noticed is that the kids who don't have as much opportunity to experience things outside their apartment as other kids do, and there's a massive range, obviously, in what that is, but they embrace this, almost more than anybody. And one of the things we would do after we had our, typically we would do like a little bit of a focused learning at the first half of the year when we first got to the park. We would go every week for half a day or 2/3 of a day. And the first part was tying into our tree study. So we would be something a little bit focused. And then we would have our circle, and we would come together, and then we would share, and we would have snack. And then it was an open-ended learning time, which we call it explore and play. And we would set the boundaries for where kids could go. And we would have at least 3 adults with us to help with that. I mean, me and 2 others, or me and Valerie and 1 other, I guess, quite often. And that first, in the beginning of Explore and Play, kids were often frolicking, rolling down a hill, playing tag, and that's really important. I'm sure almost all of us have spent some portion of our career defending play and trying to make an argument of why it's so good. We know it's good. It's too bad we have to make such a case for it. But it would almost always morph into something different than physical play. It would evolve into something, an exploration into a log and what was under the log, or one day after a storm, this massive branch had fallen down. The kids organized themselves, the entire class, to pick up this. It was so, it was very green. It was very heavy. The whole class organized themselves to pick this whole thing up and take it, 500 yards away to another section of the park. Or if there was, mold growing on something on a side of a tree, and people coming together and checking that out. But different groups. It wasn't everybody all at once. But in the course of this explore and play period, almost everybody was playing and exploring and doing both those things in some kind of sequence. And my feeling was that the kids who had not had much opportunity for these things were learning so much, getting their, digging to me, digging into the dirt and touching the dirt and finding this worm. And Mr. Allgood, can you see this worm? I'm actually gonna, Renee makes a good point here. I can share the screen of the kids.
Right.
This is not that.
Wow. Cooperation.
Are you seeing the photograph now?
Yeah.
Is that collaboration or is that collaboration?
Yeah, so this is, and it's surprisingly heavy, and we ended up taking it back to our classroom, and getting it, we were on the 3rd floor, and getting it up, it's so long, it's actually hard to figure out how to get it all the way up to the top floor, but really, for them to lift it, they had to get everybody involved in it, and then to carry it back, 3 blocks. And they're them organizing themselves and the excitement about it, and learning to collaborate. Collaborating is one of the things that we, in a job interview, it's talked about as being highly valued. And what better way to do that than in a way that means something to the people involved?
Yeah, it happens naturally. It's not something that we feel like we have to set up, like in our classroom, set up a situation where they have to learn to cooperate. I think that if you give them a situation, enough space, enough experiences, and you let them be, it happens naturally. It's beautiful.
Amy, you were talking the other day when I was speaking with you, you were talking about how what was happening out in the park or the forest was followed up in the classroom. And you were giving the example of the children with the mud.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you have the photo. I have the photos, but I don't know if you have
them on me. I don't know if you.
Let me see if I can show that, because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
You guys keep talking while I'm doing it. Let's see if I can do it.
What's been interesting is like I don't know how many years we've been doing this, Bill. Is it 9?
This would be our 6th year.
Oh God. No. But
That's a long time.
Each class they're each different interests come up. You never know what's going to strike kids, One year it was nests, another year it was stick houses, another one was fairy houses. Oh, there it is.
Right. Let me see if I
Um,
can.
One year it's moving the water. So, oh, that year it rained and it rained and it rained. Oh, I don't
Talk
know.
about what's happening here.
Oh, that's okay. So one year it was about moving water around. This particular year, the kids had a lot of rain and they really enjoyed playing in the mud. And they did it all the time, often that year in forest school, but they wanted to be able to play with the mud. They wanted to have mud in the classroom. And my goal was to try to bring the outdoors into the classroom, inside the classroom, especially for the kids who don't get opportunities to be out in nature very much. So it became an inquiry. I basically just said, wow, you want mud in the classroom. How could we do that? What do you think we need? And they listed all the stuff. Some kids said, we need to have crushed leaves. Another person said, we need to have uh, uh, potting dirt. Another person said we needed, trying to forget. Oh, I love how they said, we have to have forest dirt. And there's a photo of the kids digging the dirt. They called it dirt, that's their term, and put it in a plastic bag and brought it in. And then I asked the kids, well, so now what do we need to do? And so they came up with their own experiments. Eventually they discovered that if you add water to different substances, you get a muddy sort of feeling. So they did their experiments to see what worked. That one that you're showing, the kids were using soil, which was kind of interesting, potting soil. Um, Sand and water, because in that forest area that we go to, there is a sandy area. So there they are, working with the sand right there. Oh boy, they love to just sink their hands into it. It's so great. They also had they found that the forest dirt worked really well. They had to also play with, how much water, how much dirt type substance do they need. They figured it out. I asked Bill to bring in some dry, I don't know if this is the right term, like a dry clay. I think that's what it's called. He brought it in. And so that was the one thing I added secretly. And they started adding water and mixing. And then I basically asked them, well, which type of mud do you like the most? And different kids had different ideas. But it was basically a general consensus was the sand and water was great. The forest dirt was great. But, how about that clay? That was so interesting. And they did discover that what they made was the same kind of clay that they use in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So that was that simple, sweet little thing that came from the children became a really fun experience. Mm-hmm. And there's so many wonderful books about mud, and you could make your own with the kids. And then there was one very funny fictional book that I wish I could remember the name of. So there's it was just glorious and beautiful, and the parents were excited too.
Merril, so are you in the forest all the time, or do you go back into a classroom, or is it the forest totally your classroom? How does it work for you?
Well, right now, with the caretaker group, caregiver group, and parent group, we're going in the mornings into the forest. I do spend afternoons at a wonderful outdoor elementary program, and that's fully outdoors all day, a full school day for elementary age students. So our days are spent completely outside. But I was just thinking, just to follow up on that thought with the mud inquiry and the possibility of inquiry when I did go back into a classroom, I was thinking about what usually would come up was something revolving around an ethical dilemma a little bit, because there's just sort of human nature, this want to collect and take and own all of the treasures, and just sort of the the opportunity for ethical inquiry around these really important conversations of, is it okay to bring a snail back into the classroom with us? And is it okay to bring usually a living creature? Is it okay to hold these creatures in our hand, and inevitably they would usually fall or die or get squished? And so this is another thing that I think is just really powerful, especially when you're with children all day, and there's sort of a place, a classroom, a place to bring back those treasures is really exciting to children. And it's really powerful to figure out, answer is not the right word, because just figure out a path with children of what seems ethical and right. And it's been different things, different years. I know like one year snails were this was when we lived in the Netherlands. We were at an international school in the Netherlands, and it's very wet there. And so there were many, many, many snails in the garden, in the school garden. And so many poor snails were dropped on the cement ground and lost their life. And when that happens, the snail bubbles come from the shell, and there's so much to unpack and learn about that and deal with in the feelings. And I remember in this one particular class, they developed a way to safely bring the snails back for short periods of time by building, we used hammer and nails and wood and built a snail home for the classroom for short term. And it was lots of dialogue and lots of conversation. Renee, you mentioned that quote about if we want our children to, right, essentially defend the earth and be stewards of the earth, you sometimes have to go through this, you do have to go through the process of dropping the snail on the ground and feeling what that feels like, and working with those feelings and having grown-ups talk with you about those things, because that's the curriculum. That's what matters. And I think that's the real power in when in all of your programs that you're speaking of, you have this day that's a really powerful day outdoors, and then the power to connect it back to the classroom. That's what I really miss too about being in an actual classroom and going outdoors, is the power of extending that inquiry.
Mm. If each of you had one like really strong piece of advice for teachers who have never done this, but are really inspired by what you're saying and want to give it a try, I mean, what would you say to them? Would it be something instructional or something inspirational or something like, what would you want to tell a teacher who wants to give this a try and hasn't done it, or a principal who is thinking, oh, I don't know, can I let the teachers in my school do this? Is it something that we can do? Or parents who are very protective of their child and really don't know if they want their child to have that kind of experience where there's like a little bit of risk, or some risk, where, there's children don't have that many opportunities to take risks anymore. And this really is giving them opportunities to take risks, physical risks, emotional risks too, based on some of the things you said. But so what would be the word of wisdom, the sentence of wisdom that you might pass on? What do you think?
I would be pragmatic. I mean, assuming somebody's gonna be excited about the opportunity to do that to begin with, and my pragmatic say, what I would say to them pragmatically is like, yeah, make sure you have really good routines. Write them down, figure them out in advance, because that's going to be an important part of making it successful. But just as an aside, I think I'm not so sure there's more physical risk than there is in the playground or in the school building.
It's a perception. It's a perception.
Exactly. But I do agree with you. We need to be taking risk, manageable risk. Kids need to be taking manageable risk.
Right.
I found that a lot. Every year there was a handful of parents who were nervous, very anxious.
And what would you say to parents who might feel that way? What would you say to them?
I would invite them in to the forest
Mhm.
school so they could watch their children and see what's happening. That and see their child. I mean, they're usually so full of joy and a sense of accomplishment to be able to crawl over that big, long, fallen tree or whatever that is. I think that they need to see their children,
Mhm.
and with I guess the teachers would need to say and pull back and really watch. 'Cause, you know, I'm thinking of so many parents who are, oh, careful, careful, don't try that, or they feel like they have to spot the child. But really, if you just let go, it's amazing what they can do.
Mhm.
You know, and my advice for teachers is to, when they're in the forest, pull back and really watch what your children are doing, because it's pretty amazing, and what they're interested in.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. Um, have you seen? I don't want to go to another direction, but have you seen anything about Angie play? Where in China, where oh, you will have to look at it.
Merril, you talk about it.
Well, it will. I'll share a link with all of you guys. Maybe I'll even put a link onto here. But when you talk about teachers watching what children doing and giving children freedom to take risks and to collaborate with each other, and it's actually quite exciting to see. Um, so, Merrill, what would you say?
Putting you on the spot.
Uh, oh, not about that, about my one piece of advice, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll put something on about Angie play.
Yeah, Angie play is amazing, but I won't try to encompass it. I think I've been thinking about especially this idea of for parents and for educators and people in person and some remote. There's right now in particular, it's really maybe a challenge to try to navigate getting outside. And when I was really distilling it to like my biggest why is if we want children to feel this deep sort of wonder and love and awe for the earth and for nature, we really need to provide moments for these sense impressions. Like when I think of my childhood, when you think of your childhood and a nature, a moment, a beautiful moment you remember in nature. For me, I remember being alone in my backyard, and I don't remember what I'm playing or doing. I just remember tall pine trees, and I remember the feeling of the sun. And so if that's our why, what experiences could we provide children? Could we offer children that provide these sort of heart-filling sense impression moments? And I think it can be a little outside the box if you're not so comfortable doing nature school or forest play. Bringing a blanket outside with your students and reading a story outside on the playground is a really cozy, powerful moment where children, I would imagine for many children, some children will build those sort of like heart-filling sense impression moments. And for parents and caregivers, taking a walk around the block where you're really engaging in dialogue with your child is a powerful moment to build that sense impression where they will remember this, how the sun felt on their cheeks. And this may be a leap, but I do believe it's true. For grandparents, telling a story about you and an adventure you had in nature as a child, camping, boating, who knows what it is, probably incredible. Tell your grandchild, because oral storytelling is incredibly powerful for the listener to actually perceive, to feel that they are living that story. And so I guess I would offer people to teachers, parents, caregivers to feel that it's expansive. If you think of what your why is, that maybe it expands the possibility of interacting in nature with your child.
Mm-hmm. Great. Bill, you started this out, so what are you going to end this with?
I would say to people, just have faith. Have faith in your kids. Trust them. When they get out there, they know what to do. They know what their own limitations are, and you know, we tend to be overprotective. And if we stand back and allow them, if they know that they're trusted, if they know that you have faith in them, then it changes everything. If they know that they have permission to explore on their own, to explore their own interests, they will. And you know, a lot of times people are worried about the weather. They're worried about the physical conditions. All those things have solutions. You know, you can fix all those things. You can work around them. The one thing you can't work around is if you don't have faith. You have to have faith in your kids.
So I want to end with a beautiful little excerpt that I saw today, written by Jane Goodall. Okay. The fact that children are spending less and less time in nature, and some not at all, is not only a tragedy for individual children, but for the future of our species. But this contact is so important for psychological and spiritual development. When I think of my childhood, I remember spring bulbs pushing up pale shoots through the dead leaves, spiders in the garden carrying tiny babies on their backs, the scent of violets and honeysuckle, and the sound of the wind rustling the leaves as I perched for hours in the branches of my beech tree. It was that magic of childhood that shaped the passion that drives me to spend my life fighting to save and protect the last wild places of the planet. And I think you are all a part of that. So thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. And I think teachers will find it very helpful and inspirational, and parents and grandparents too. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting this together, Renee.
Thanks. Yeah.
And thanks to everyone